And I can hear her saying that with the utmost clarity and calmness and kindness, that Stanley was very sick and he died. And it was just like in the simplest terms for everybody to just take that in was so powerful. Stanley was sick and he died. Before we dive into this episode, I want to give you a heads up that we will be talking about some deeply personal and sensitive topics, including miscarriage, infant loss, pregnancy termination, depression, and anxiety. These are heavy subjects, and it's okay if you are not in a place where you are ready to hear them right now. Your well-being is so important, and if this feels like too much for you today, maybe it's not the right time to listen. Please take care of yourself and come back when you feel ready. Hello and welcome back to It's Getting Mom in Here. I'm your host, Kori. I am so happy to have you here. If this is your first time coming across the podcast, welcome. Happy to have you. I would suggest that you pause this episode and go back to the very first episode of the season, because this is a story I'm telling in sequential order, so it will make a lot more sense if you start from the beginning. If you are joining and you have listened to all the episodes, thank you so much. We are at the end of this story. And this last episode, I really just want to talk about some of the things that we chose to do after the birth of our son. So I talked about it a little bit in the last episode, that those first few days and weeks at home were really just about survival and finding a way to move forward and carry this immense amount of grief that felt unbearable. There were moments of, how are we ever going to laugh? How are we ever going to try again for a child? Because this pain is too much. We can't ever cope with this again. How do we act normal around our friends? How do we see our family members? How do we react when friends share the news of their own pregnancy? And if you're somebody who is currently in the depths of their loss, the only thing I can say is that it does get easier. It all gets easier. You will laugh again. You will find joy again. And you will walk through life carrying this grief and this sorrow and this loss. And I would say that is one of the biggest things that we learned in this journey is the word and, that you are going to be happy and sad forever. And I think that goes for anything. It's just this for us was the first time that we had a loss that felt this big and this meaningful in our life. I think one of the challenges for me is I was, in my early 30s at the time that we lost our son. And that means that everybody and their sister was getting pregnant. And it just felt like no matter what, if I opened up social media, if I opened up Facebook, Instagram, whatever, somebody was posting a pregnancy announcement. And that was really challenging for me to take in and absorb. And there were moments that I just had to put the phone away, delete the apps, definitely delete the pregnancy tracking apps if you have one. It was just like any reminder of the pregnancy or reminders of like, you would have been 25 weeks and the baby is the size of a whatever, like couldn't handle those. I will say one of the challenging things that we had to cope with was in our grief and trying to manage our loss. We found out that my brother-in-law and sister-in-law were expecting. And that was so complicated. It was so messy. It was so hard to take in that news and feel happy for them and feel sad for us and long for our son to have been able to be really similar ages with their cousin and to see someone else have a successful pregnancy so close to us, both in like close relationship wise, but close in time. And then it was hard navigating the emotions of, I didn't want to take away from the joy of their pregnancy and be the Debbie Downer, but it was really hard to show up and feel joy in those moments. And now they have a son who's almost 2, and I love him to death. I love my little nephew. He's an adorable little man. And it took some work for all of us to get there, if I'm truthful. And there were some phone calls and discussions between all of us about, okay, how do we navigate this? And it was actually really great that we were all just open about it and communicated, because no family is prepared to deal with such complex emotions around like joy and grief and all of that. And nobody wanted to say something that would hurt the other person. And we didn't want to set boundaries that were upsetting for them, but by not verbally setting our boundaries, then that felt like we were just distancing ourselves. Like it was complex, and it was a lot to add to our plate, that not only were we seeing, my old friend from high school getting pregnant, I can swipe past that and be like, okay, I'm just not going to think about that. But having an immediate family member be pregnant was emotionally challenging. It added to the sense of loss in a way that was like visible, that this grandchild to my in-laws, my son, has died. And now this next grandchild is living, and that's their first living grandchild. And we didn't get to have our son be the first living grandchild. I feel like that probably sounded confusing, but it just really emphasized all the things that we thought were going to be, and then they weren't. And then I've sorted out the timeline in my head, because my sister-in-law waited. She's like very generously waited and very thoughtful in how she waited to share the news. But there, came a point that she was going to have to tell us. And I know that was hard for them, but I did the math and I'm like, oh my God, they knew they were pregnant when we were sharing about having to say goodbye to Stanley. And I was just like, oh my God, that would have been so hard for her to handle that news while being pregnant. And all of her emotions were so complex. And it was just this heaviness for the whole family in a time that's supposed to be so joyous. And if you find yourself in a similar situation, the only thing I can say is just talk. Just keep talking about it. Share how you're feeling. And we're a very close family. And so nobody was going to be hurt by somebody sharing the way that they were feeling. Everyone really wanted to just like find empathy in that situation. But it was a tricky one to get to the other side of, for sure. And then we also just felt like we needed to just get away from the world for a little bit. So we booked a trip to the Dominican. We pieced out for a week, no cell phones, barely any internet. And that was really lovely, just to have time, Taylor and I, to reset and recharge. And shocker, when you get back after a vacation, everything is still just the way you left it. And it felt like, okay, well, we're just like walking back into that grief. It didn't go away. We had to just find ways to cope. And for me, it was a lot of yoga, doing my yoga teacher training while I was on my mat leave. I really got deep into crafting. And that was something where my therapist said to me, crafting can be so valuable, and it's often seen as something that children do and then elderly people do. And it's eye-opening for her to just say to me that like, you can be an adult and just like craft because it feels good. And that really helped me feel like I like had permission to just sit and do a craft. And I like learned how to sew. That was really therapeutic for me. Honestly, it was just a lot of finding ways to pass the time, finding ways to occupy your mind. Now I'm going to fast forward a teeny bit here. Stanley was born in March and his due date was mid-July. So as we were getting closer to July, I felt strongly that I would like to have a celebration of life for him. So we didn't have a funeral. He was cremated and we just went to pick up the remains when it was time. Like it wasn't a big funeral event when that happened. So he was cremated at the funeral home that we had requested. And it was actually really lovely that the place that does the cremations and the coroner's office, who both had to be involved, they both charge fees when somebody dies, and all of those fees were waived, which was really lovely because it is not cheap to get a family member cremated and do the coroner's office shenanigans. So that was nice that it was just like, oh, there is some like hope in humanity left, and someone's not going to charge me for cremating my infant. It was hard enough to manage that. The point is, we did not have a funeral. It didn't feel right for me to have a funeral. It felt like we had shed enough tears over all of this, and I wanted there to be some happy memories of Stanley. So I talked to Taylor about it. He agreed. We said, how about the weekend of his due date, let's host a celebration of life. Then we were like, how do you have a celebration of life for a baby? I've only been to celebration of lives for like a 90-year-old. Now, I can't remember if somebody suggested it to us or if a little like breeze popped the idea back into our heads. But when we were getting married, our cousin Laura, who I have mentioned before, she was the midwife, which, okay, now that I like, when I do these podcasts, I really just like tell the story. Sometimes I have a few little notes, and I'm thinking back to the birth, and I completely forgot to say that Laura was there. So I'm just going to do a little sidebar. Things happened really quickly during the birth once the medication kicked in, and we had said that we would like for her to be there at the birth. And she lives in a town over from us, maybe a 30-minute drive. And we had been texting her saying, okay, like things are starting to happen. And then it was like, bam, things are really starting to happen. And she did not get there in time. And she was like, what the hell? Like, I thought I had time. But anyways, I can't believe I skipped over that. She was there for the birth, and she was there in those meetings with our parents and everything after. And she is such a lovely person to just have in a room as almost like a buffer person. She's got a really good sense for like, oh, I don't think this conversation is going to be what Kori and Taylor want right now. I'm just going to insert myself and change the topic, or just intercept this in some way. And so having her there for that emotional support, and she was just a key person in a lot of our journey. She was a go-to person for questions, and she's very close to Taylor. So I can't believe I forgot to mention that. So anyways, Laura had mentioned to us back when we were engaged that a friend of hers, someone that she knew, was an officiant, and this officiant was very accepting of all types of love, all types of people, all types of couples. She would do every person's wedding. And it was really important to us that we had an officiant at our wedding that felt like that. Even though we are not a same-sex couple, we are not unique in the way that we identify. We both are cisgender, just all of that. So just about anyone is going to officiate a wedding for us, but it was really important to us that we find someone that just valued and respected all forms of love. And we found that not every officiant does. So we decided we wanted to be picky about that. So we reached out to this officiant. Their name is Jody. So she was not available that weekend. So then we were paired up with a colleague of hers, someone else that she works with, who had very similar ideals and values, and that was a good fit. And we just moved on from that and didn't really give it another thought. Now we fast forward, we're trying to plan the celebration of life. We think, I wonder if that Jody person would be a good person to talk to. I think that they might do different ceremonies and things that are just a little bit outside the norm. And I knew that Jody was also very associated to death care and was a doula. It just seemed like, this might be a good person to reach out to. So we just did like a cold call email, reached out, said, here's the situation. What do you think? Right away, they were like, yes, I'm there. I am ready to support you in any way. Let's set up a meeting and we can talk. Jody comes to our house. We sit down, and you never know what a meeting like that will be with someone, and ultimately a stranger, and we're about to just open up and share what's been going on. She was so kind and gentle, and like this presence that's just like a warm hug. You meet her and she is a warm hug. And this was not her first rodeo. She really guided the session and the questions and getting us to share about Taylor and I, getting to share about the pregnancy. And we talked for like over an hour. It really just felt right that this was a good person to help us plan something. She was incredible in the way that she took on different tasks for us and said, what sort of things would you like your family members to do in this celebration of life? And I said, I would really love to open it up to anyone who would like to share in any way at all. And Jody took it upon themselves to reach out to everyone, send out those emails and say, please let me know if you would like to participate in this. I'll put it into the agenda for the ceremony and all of that. She really took on those like administrative tasks that when you're grieving, you just have no capacity for. So we met with Jody a few more times, planning everything out. Taylor and I were able to handle getting some catering. We wanted to really make it special and get decorations and decorate the backyard and do all of the things, find a pretty dress to wear. We got a beautiful urn to put Stanley in. We got a gorgeous engraved rock that sits in our backyard in a garden. We found stones for everyone to write a little message to make a little stone garden for Stanley. The meaning behind his name, the translation is Stony Meadow. So it felt really fitting to have a little stone garden for him in our backyard. Jody just really helped us organize everything. And along the way, we felt ourselves growing closer and closer and closer in a way that just feels like this is a person that was meant to integrate into your life. She was not meant to integrate in our lives at the wedding. She was meant to come into our lives here. She was exactly the person we needed in that moment, somebody to support us and cherish our son and really understand what it was we were experiencing, and that she was honored to be a part of honoring him. The event was fairly small. We had it in the afternoon. It was a beautiful day out. We hosted it in our backyard. We had our whole family. We had cousin Laura. I won't forget this time to mention that she too was there. And we put out the invite to my midwife and my maternal fetal medicine specialist. They both accepted and they both showed up, and it was so special and so heartwarming to have healthcare providers take time out of their busy lives and on a day off come and be a part of this. It really made me feel like we got the cream of the crop when it came to healthcare practitioners that were involved in Stanley's birth. It really meant a lot to me that they showed up, and it's like, this is a doctor-patient, midwife-patient relationship here, and it just felt like they meant so much to me and that it was reciprocated and they felt honored to honor Stanley. And that was so special to me. In the ceremony, it was really beautiful. We had everyone sit in the backyard, and when it was time to commence everything, Taylor and I came around the side of the house holding Stanley's urn and sat down on this bench beside the little garden we had set up. Jody read some beautiful poems, and the way she had with words was just so impactful and so beautiful. She was so gentle and careful in how she spoke. And I can remember she asked me, how do you want me to say what's happening here? Because there were a lot of kids, and we were trying to think of what's the right wording for this. So kids being like my nieces and nephews, who this was a little bit confusing for them what was happening. And I said, I would like to say that Stanley was very sick and he died. And I can hear her saying that with the utmost clarity and calmness and kindness, that Stanley was very sick and he died. And it was just like, in the simplest terms, for everybody to just take that in was so powerful. Stanley was sick and he died. It was really lovely seeing different family members speak. One of those people was my mom, and she went up and she read 2 poems. And this was so special because my mom did not speak at any of mine or my sister's weddings. She would always go up with my dad and be there for support while my dad would read the speech that they both wrote, but she never spoke. I think my mom feels a little shy in situations like that. So I knew this was a big deal that she chose to speak, and the poems she read were beautiful. And things like that just really emphasize how impacted everyone was. And it was really beautiful to hear her share her own grief and her own feelings. Taylor's parents also read something. Taylor's brother read this beautiful poem that he wrote in sort of a Dr. Seuss style rhyme that was just beautiful. Then my one sister and my dad did a duet. So my dad in retirement has picked quite possibly the most obnoxious instrument to learn how to play. My poor mother has not yet divorced him, but he has decided to learn to play the accordion, which is fun because my family is German, and so polka is, a music of our people. So it's fun. He's learning this instrument. He never knew how to play any instruments growing up, so he's learning to play the accordion. He learned a song, and my sister sang. It was called "You Never Walk Alone," and it was beautiful. And it's all of these things. We have them all tucked away, all the lyrics and the words to all the poetry. And it was just so special to listen to other people share in their loss and see their grief. And I think things like that make it feel so much more real. And it was important to us to have this celebration of life because it felt like to us, in a way, we needed to prove that he was here because his life was so short. So we were doing anything we could to just really make it all real, and to see how everyone stepped up and opened up about their grief. And it just solidified that everyone here knows that Stanley existed. There's no question about it. He is a part of this family. After that, Taylor and I read something that we had written, and it was incredibly difficult to get through, but it was just so nice to sort of take the floor in front of our family and really express what we were feeling. After that, we played that True song that I keep mentioning in the morning. We played that song while everyone took time to bring their rock, their little stone that they had written a message on. They brought it up, placed it in the garden, and then went and grabbed either a shot of rye or a shot of apple juice. If you remember in the very first episode, I talk about how I could never hide my pregnancy because our family loves to have shots of rye. And whenever I go to my parents' house, it's a shot and a beer. And so it was very fitting to have a shot for everyone to take. And we all toasted to Stanley. After that, the party happened and the celebration happened. And it was so beautiful, again, to have grief, sadness, all of the things, and joy, and bringing the family together and knowing that the whole family got together today because of Stanley. We had amazing food. We had set up like a ninja rope course for the kids. That was something that I, in my anxiety and stress, felt it was very important to have things to entertain the children. So we must get a ninja rope course. Every good celebration of life has to have one. So we set that up. It was a huge hit. It was everyone mingling and chatting. And it was beautiful to sit with my midwife and my MFM and really just talk to them as people. It was just such a lovely day to celebrate, to really celebrate. And I think about just right now. So I'm recording this just before Halloween. And I've been seeing some stuff on Instagram and social media of other lost parents who really have a hard time with Halloween. And they feel like, why is death being celebrated and glorified? And it's upsetting to them. And I hear them. I can absolutely understand that. And it's just interesting how perspectives can be so different. Although I'm not jumping up and down, just absolutely thrilled that my child died. No, that's not it. But I do feel like death is something that can be celebrated. That's what we did on this day. And I think back to that, and I think I live my life now in a way that celebrates and honors his life and his death. So it's just interesting to know how everyone has a different view and perspective on it. And I think that that's really powerful for all of us to remember that although we can go through similar experiences, our feelings afterwards can be so very different. So that, I guess, is just a little sidebar about Halloween. For me, I think what's harder, it's that our son doesn't have an opportunity to go trick-or-treating, get into a costume and be a kid. And anyways, I digress. After that ceremony, one of the most beautiful things to come of that was Jody becoming an incredibly close friend and an incredibly important character in the lives of Taylor and I. I know that at some point I will have her on this podcast. I could do a podcast with just her. She is an amazing, amazing person with lots to say, knows the right things to say in every moment, and we can all stand to learn something from them. I'm going to keep it short today. I really just wanted to share the celebration of life, mostly just because if you are somebody who has experienced this and you're unsure of what you want to do next, if it feels right to have a funeral, if it feels right to have a celebration of life, just know that it is totally up to you, and you can decide to do it at any point in time. If your loss was like 5 years ago and it feels right now to do something, then by all means do it. This is never something that should feel like it's too late. And I think we really felt that way with creating traditions around the anniversaries of things. On Stanley's birthday and the day that he died, so March 4th, we have often put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be like, oh my gosh, we have to do something. This past year with our now living son, so we do have a living son. I didn't really mention him throughout the rest of this podcast, and I did that on purpose. So we do have a living child named Milo. This year, we decided that we would bake a cake, go for a walk as a family, and just spend the day doing family things and really keep it simple. The year before, we had both parents over. We made a nice meal, we did a cake, and we celebrate his birthday. I would say, as a parent that is still learning to navigate those big anniversaries, those big holidays, feeling this pressure to do something to commemorate can be very heavy. It can feel like all or nothing. And I think my only advice there is just do what feels right in that moment and don't put pressure on yourself to make it perfect. So maybe one year it doesn't feel right to put up a Christmas stocking for the child that you've lost because you don't have the right one. Let's say you want something really specific, or you want to make one and you didn't have time to do it. Don't put the pressure on yourself. You can do it next year if you want to. You can change the tradition for next year. You can put the stocking up in January if you want to. You can celebrate the birthday 3 weeks late. It is up to you. There are no rules, and just do whatever feels right to you and be kind to yourself, and don't put extra pressure on yourself. I am going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, thank you so much to the people that reach out after the episodes and let me know that you're listening. That is so special to me. I love knowing that you are enjoying the show, that there are things that have been really impactful for you. And remember, you can follow me on social media at It's Getting Mom in Here. You can check out my website, itsgettingmominhere.com. There is still a little question box if you want to ask any questions at any point. Toss one in there. It's gettingmominhere.com/about the show. Remember to leave a rating, leave a review, share this with a friend, all that good stuff. And thank you so much for being here. And remember to just be kind to yourself. Bye for now.